I want to be able to draw perspective like this. But YouTube teaching videos seem to be like this. So how do I make the jump from this to this? In this video, I want to show you a simple exercise that would be incredibly useful if you at least do it in your head, but better yet, on paper, before you attempt a complex drawing, to make sure that when you put the time into this scene, you get as much result for that time as you possibly can. And this exercise certainly reflects the way I think when I look at a complex architectural subject that I'm going to draw, to make sure I get the perspective correct. But to do this exercise, we will need to know how to do these quick perspective thumbnail sketches. That we have an eye level, also known as the horizon, and that any object we see, depending on the angle we're viewing it from, will create perspective lines, which is simply the angle that horizontal lines take from that viewpoint. But some clever person worked out that if you extend these perspective lines till they meet in both directions, they actually meet on the eye level. The eye level is the level our eyes are at when we look at the object. And perspective operates for the parts we can't see. And while this is a simple box, we can add other simple shapes onto it. And it doesn't have to be just boxes either. But still, what's the relevance of this to this? And the relevance is that these big, grand objects are really just lots of boxes or different shapes, spheres, half spheres, triangles, pyramids, piled on top of each other. But the problem with drawing this is there's so much detail, we start to get distracted from the underlying perspective. And what we need to do is to see the underlying perspective more clearly even than we see the ornamentation that's been stuck on. I can mess up a lot of the ornamentation in this drawing and you will never notice. But if I mess up the perspective, you will notice. So if I want to draw grand architecture and have it look right at the end, I need to make sure that I still get the perspective spot on. And the way I've found to do that is to identify the most basic shapes and see how the perspective of this view affects those basic shapes. Because if I can get those correct, then I can just add on all the decoration blocks easily enough, which although they take the most time to draw, they're not going to be the most important thing for the eye to see. I believe this relatively simple exercise will accelerate your ability to see the perspective that you need to see clearly and in a way that you can capture it, whether you're drawing a simple architectural subject or a very complicated one. So let's have a look at it. But we will start with a simple example. And what this exercise is to look at our subject and to see it as its basic shape and to understand how the perspective of this view affects its basic shape. So this building is a simple rectangle, and on the top of the rectangle there sits a long triangular prism, just slightly wider than the building underneath it. So this is the shape I need to capture the perspective for. And I don't need to worry about the details that we do have. We also want to get the proportions correct. In our pre-drawing thinking in our thumbnail stage, I'm not going to draw horizons or perspective lines because in most cases, one or both or all three are actually off the drawing area. So we need to learn to draw without them. But what I do like to do is to get the angle by using my pen as a tool. And although I haven't drawn the vanishing point here, in my mind, I know that wherever these two lines meet, this line has to look as if it has a good chance of hitting the same point. So this is a simple thumbnail sketch where I'm just trying to get a sense of the proportions of the heights versus lengths and of getting these perspective angles correct. And if I notice I haven't got it quite right, I don't need to do another thumbnail sketch, I don't think. When I now go to draw the actual drawing, I'm a little more aware of perhaps I might make it too wide or too high, so I can compensate that. And of course I want to start putting the windows and the chimney in, but the whole point of a thumbnail sketch is that it's a quick preliminary sketch to help us get the proportions and the perspective angles correct, because we're not being distracted by the details. Let's look to see how it might work if we were drawing this streetscape. I'm seeing a number of tall rectangles that have a triangular gable on the end, followed by a thinner section that doesn't, followed by another section that does, followed by a wider section that doesn't, followed by another section which does. This one on the end sits forward a little bit. And then we have some horizontal divisions. Here's a quick thumbnail sketch that doesn't take the perspective into account. Now I'm going to do a quick one that does, to help me get the angles set in my head. This is quite a steep angle. This is where sometimes getting the angle can be a help. Now to help me get this proportion right, sometimes it's actually helpful to put in a window, just one. And that'll do. But it's a way, before I commit to all the detail, to all the windows, to the people, to the signage, it's a way of just getting a bit of muscle memory, if you like, in my arms, my fingers, my pen, for the angles I'm going to need to use. Before I start my drawing, I actually look at this and say, okay, is there anything that's not right? And it's not that I have to redraw this, but I take that knowledge, that determination now, that experience into my real drawing. In our next example, the architecture is starting to get a little more decorative, but it's important that we don't get distracted by that. We're looking at the fundamental lines of the building. If we get them right, the drawing will look right. Well, we've got this tower, and we have another large box-like structure that sits next to it in a section that just sits back slightly. We have a large overhanging cornice here, and then the tower continues on top. Now on this side, we have a semicircular tower that continues above the roof, and on the roof you can't really see how this tower roofing is formed. And there is also a separation between the lower part of the building and the upper part of the building. Let's go. The point of this is to get the sort of angles we're going to need to draw in our head. And this pretty much is enough for the purposes of this exercise. Then we stand back and we have a look to see, do these proportions look right? One way of helping to work out if there's some doubt is to add some of the detail just in a part of it. And I'm thinking, yes, that seems to work reasonably well proportion-wise. I can now more carefully draw my actual drawing. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, it's tempting to think, oh, these little thumbnail sketches, they're not going to help you draw something as large and complex as this. But I remember when I was drawing this, paying such attention to those perspective lines above all the decorative elements that cover the outside of this cathedral in Berlin. Particularly the perspective angles with those two towers on the left. It was so important to keep those lines angling in the right way so the building would look right at the end. I didn't even get the top of the dome right on the first go, but you can't really tell because all the lines that really attract attention, the perspective angles, are correct. So it's really worth trying this, I think.